Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who Guide. I am your host, Alex Patterson, and today I am very, very excited to be interviewing an incredible Doctor Who fan, artist, writer, Smuzz. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
So yeah, um, watching it with other people is like anything. It's if you've written, because I've worked in comics and so forth, and just being in. There was a point when the comic came out, and I was in the pub when some people walked in and they got that comic, and just being in the room, even without watching them turn the pages and listening to talk about it, and you can see it through their eyes. It's an amazing thing that when somebody else reads a thing which you've done, you see it differently. And if you're watching a program or a film you like, you're going, "Oh God, no, this is terrible." You've loved every bit, but you're seeing it through them and thinking, "Oh, this is boring. I think it's brilliant, but this is actually boring for them." And yet, it's so important to see it with other people because you do get other things. They show you things which are wonderful, which you've never noticed. And I think Doctor Who's good for that.
Absolutely.
I'm
The
rabbiting.
one of the things that I find interesting is as I've been, posting videos online is I've gotten used to, people on the internet seeing my videos. But if I have to show them to somebody in my family, then it's absolute torture to be sat there and looking over and going, "Oh, this isn't as good as I want it to be." And so it it's reminded me of that when you were saying it.
Yeah, always watching with a non-Doctor Who fan. That's the pain because a friend of mine at some point, I've forgotten, I was talking something about Doctor Who, and he said, "Now you know what it's like to be a football fan." I thought, "Oh God, yeah. Your team is always rubbish. They always lose. You remember the bits when they were great, but they didn't get the goal and stuff." It's there's always been that thing when a program came out, and it certainly was when I was younger. The program would come out, and you'd pray it would be good, and you wouldn't so much watch it as just pray it wouldn't be rubbish, just keep score. And because you knew at school the next day, somebody would say, "Oh, there was that rubbish thing." Yes, there was rubbish, but or they'd say it's rubbish, and you say, "No, that was the clever click." Really... And yeah, it's so important that one of the one of the important things once was I had to keep an entire. I was on an outward boundy thing, holiday thing with some in a in a school over the summer with lots of other kids, and we had to decide what to watch, whether it was Tarzan, which is American TV series, which you may have seen from the 60s, or whether it was Doctor Who. And I had convinced them what a really great idea it was to see Doctor Who because it was a new story, it was going to be great. And I had to keep them sort of cheering all the way through, sort of cheerleading for this program. And it was going to be so good. So I was sort of lying to them about what they were seeing. It was good, but it had to be great. It had to be not turning over to Tarzan great. And yeah, it is quite, it can be quite awkward. On the other hand, I think it's just sometimes it's just so brilliant. You just think the human race is not ready for such wonderful program. That doesn't happen all the time.
I mean, it is. There are moments where, and certain stories, whether that be robots of death, which I love as well, by the way. And in that is one of, I think, the best explanations of um, the TARDIS being bigger on the inside than on the
Yeah,
outside ever. And it's not overly scientific. It's not, it was done in a way that you can't really argue. I mean, I'm sure some people could argue the science of it, but it wasn't trying to say, oh, well, use all this jargon. It was put in a really magnificently simple way.
Doctor's never tried to explain how because that would be silly. So with William Hartnell, he famously baffles the teachers by saying, "Well, you've developed television, haven't you?" And that's just a metaphor, which is just showing his contempt for these 1960s school teachers. And then the doctor explaining to Leela is absolutely gorgeous because what he's doing is saying, "I'll explain it to this member of the Sever team. She's intelligent, but I'll get the idea to her without any of the mechanics. So it's, well, here's the problem. It's like this. And if you can do that, that's how you do it. And it's a circular argument. It isn't really a definition at all, but it gives you the feeling you've had an explanation. And that's, you know, that wonderful sort of 3-card trick, which is perfect for Leela because she is intelligent enough to work it out. And she's intelligent enough to see how the trick works, but not technical enough. She's not a Tesh to say, show me the cogs.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
yeah. And I look, that is one of the best moments. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And because she's not trying to build her own TARDIS, she just wants to understand, how is this possible, and have that very natural reaction that one would have to walking into a space that's bigger on the inside than the outside.
Well, the other thing is she's been breaking laws. She's been asking questions, which in the Sever team you don't do. You don't do it at Tesh, obviously, but she's been asking questions. And the great thing is the Doctor lets her ask questions. And he's saying it's okay. You can do more of that. And that's just such a delight as well. Okay, so I really love Leela, along with many companions, but she's a delight, except when she's not allowed to be Leela, which is most of the time.
Most of the time. One of the moments that I think, another companion that isn't, I mean, both of these companions in the 1997 annual are not given. I mean, I was talking with Lee Sullivan about this. So you had just 6 panels each week to catch everybody up on what had happened, have your own story and climax, move the story forward, and then write your cliffhanger in the next episode. So you have these characters going through so much, and especially Stacy, in the original comics. If you look at her life, it just explodes, and everybody she knows, it basically gets killed, and then all of a sudden you're off into another story in a comic, and she seems to be completely okay. And so one of the things that I tried to do in my story was, kind of address that PTSD almost that you would have from going through a terrible experience like that, and not just ignore it, because in Doctor Who, it can, even with a new series, be a case of new writer, new story. We have these characters, and we're not thinking about what came before, maybe because the writer was never even briefed on what came before, but just you had to write your new story. Most of the time that's how it was. And so I'm interested to know, with your illustrations, or with your writing in the annual, how did you take on that challenge of these new companions? Because clearly both of us, we care about these characters and want to make them as real and believable and enticing as possible. So how did you approach them?
I didn't. I've not read the comic strip, and as I say, I've got an obsession with Ice Warriors, and I really want to develop Ice Warriors properly. And I've got issues with what was done with the Ice Warriors. They're far too they're Klingons with shells, and they're not alien enough. And I know what Ice Warriors are like, really, so I can't do that. But the main thing, as you said, I clearly could see that there was all this preposterous amount of stuff that's there, and so it invites to write a story about PTSD, as you say, and about a dream sequence or something, and that's too much of a given. So I thought, well, this is insulting to the characters to do that. What I do is just put them to one, say, because what I do with mine is just say, well, that's really awful, so they have to go and sort that out. So what they do is they visit relatives to do some mourning. So that's them gone. Now I can do the story where I get to take a third Doctor icon and say, look at the terrible harm that can be done to this wonderful thing, and I get to grumble about well, quite a lot to do with art, actually, and quite a lot to do with reality. The internet, probably. So it's a bit arty, and but mainly it's funny. So since it's a funny story, I think it's a funny story. It's a very dark, funny story because I wrote it. And Stacey and is it Sorg?
Sorry.
Zag. Okay, that they can't be in that because no, they've got some pretty serious stuff to be dealing with. So they're not there. So no, I thought other people are exploring that. There seemed to be too much to cram into a thing because Mark wanted a short one. So I didn't do it. But I did do. Um, I'm just turning the lights on. Thank you. We did do. I did do um, classic Who stuff about faith, stuff about consumerism, and some jokes about art and social media, I suppose, which is fun because the Doctor just doesn't do that stuff.
That sounds awesome. I cannot wait. I wish I'd been able to
Well,
get to read it.
hold on.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Whoa.
That's a picture. That's a picture of a creature you probably know, and it doesn't look like that normally. So it's about that kind of thing. So but it's. I haven't got all the pictures here actually, but I don't know if that is it possible to see.
That's better. That's better. Yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. That is incredible. That look.
Okay.
That's that's amazing. Oh my goodness. What a world you've
Hopefully,
created there. So many lovely dogs having
yeah,
a
they
tea
do.
party.
They're not really lovely dogs, but so yeah, it's an opportunity to be catty about a lot of culture again because I really care about it. So yeah, that was fun. Um, and then there's the end papers again, which is an opportunity to do another sort of reference to parallels between Paul McGann and other things because there's so much to play with Doctor Who. Really, it's a tremendous toy box.
What
As long
was
as you
the
don't just
impact? Right? The
sorry.
what is it? Howe's Transcendental Toy Box, David J. Howe's Guide to Doctor Who
Mm,
Merchandise. And
yeah,
what was the, as we look at these new annuals and how strangely enough, the Terraqueous distributors on official annuals have actually gotten me more into the official annuals, and I don't know how common of an experience that is, if that's backwards or forwards, but either
it's weird.
way.
Have you seen the annuals from that period? Those periods, the old
Oh yes,
classic,
yes, yeah.
because they are. I mean, in hindsight, they're they're that wonderful thing that they're not really Who, but they really are. So for us, old folk, who were young ones, Doctor Who was on most of the year. So when it came to the summer holidays, you'd ask your mum, "Well, where's he gone?" And my mum had to say, "Well, he's allowed a summer holiday," because they just kept churning them out, as you know. And but but there was nothing to hang on to. There was your Dalek sweet cigarettes and your sort of, and maybe a give a show projector or some Mark's toys and so forth. But all you really would have would be cuttings from the Radio Times, the BBC listings magazine, which was quite swish, which would maybe say the Doctor lands in an exotic place somewhere and finds something very worrying. You think, well, that's not very helpful. There's a picture of the Doctor, and that's it. And every so often there would be the more popular newspapers like the Daily Mirror would say, "This is the new monster that's threatening the Daleks." And you get a picture of something like a monoid carrying Carol Ann Ford or something. There would always be the next thing after the Daleks. And they'd usually be carrying a companion because what else are you going to do with a guy in a rubber suit, really? But then there was the annuals, and they stayed. There was that, and there was the one. There were three novelizations, but really most people had only ever seen the one of the Daleks, which, and all of them told you lies. So the novelization of Doctor Who and the Daleks told you about stuff that had never happened and things that was never there. But basically, at least it told you the basic story, and that was pretty accurate. There was the film, which was, of course, amazing and a different reality. And then there were the annuals, which had Doctor Who stories were unlike what Doctor Who stories were. Oh, there was the TV comic strip where you had the Doctor had two grandchildren. I'm sorry,
John and
um,
Gillian.
John and Gillian. I've drawn a homage to them, which is great fun. And again, as a child, you kind of think that's real, but they're not on television, and you're not quite sure. And as the whole canon thing is a bit vague as a child as well, and so the adventures in the sweet cigarette cards you get with ice lollies, they're kind of real, but they're not. And that has a Doctor who's somewhere between the first Doctor and the second Doctor, because they weren't sure about the copyright or anything. So there's this other Doctor who is that what he looks like really, but he looks wrong on the television. I'm not sure. And the annuals were by and large about things the Doctor wasn't quite like. He'd be more likely to have weapons, and there were more sort of magical episodes and things which very often were just sort of sillier. But in the very first Doctor Who story, and then there's the Dalek annuals, of course, where the Daleks are far better than they are on television. But the first one was just so good because it actually is written by and large by David Whittaker, who was writing Doctor Who, and it's deeper and better than Doctor Who. It's if you read that one, it's the stories are terribly poignant. They're often very sad, and the Doctor is very much, as I prefer. Well, my Doctor is much more this person who's very clever, but the universe is far bigger and far more mysterious, and that's thrilling. And so, yeah, that's. I mean, it would be great to do a first Doctor annual, as it were, because that's the feeling that they've never quite had since. So it's interesting to see the way that people have dealt with each Doctor as they've come to them. I haven't read the third Doctor one. That would be interesting. But there is a sort of silliness to a certain extent with the Colin Baker ones. But then again, the TV series wasn't exactly very sensible. But it's interesting that some people just do generic Doctor Who stories, and some people do actually try take the opportunity and say, "I'll write a story that could only be for that Doctor." And that's the fun way of doing it. It's that one. That kind of story could only happen with that Doctor. And yeah, if you get to read the originals, which I think have been reprinted, haven't they? They are odd, and there's nothing quite like them. But then a lot of that might be nostalgia. I don't know. But I would recommend the very first Doctor Who. It's a work of literature,
Absolutely.
which you can't say for most of them.
Well, David Whittaker was, I reading his, Daleks novelization, was very fun because of the way that it chose to introduce people to the whole Doctor Who story by just skipping basically episodes 2, 3, and 4 of An Unearthly Child and tying the very beginning episode in with the rest of the Daleks. And
Yeah.
so that was very interesting. I absolutely loved that novelization as well as the audiobook. And what he does with the storytelling is really incredible and unique. And I've gotten into the Target novelizations through their audiobooks, because I like to, whether it's walking on my treadmill or doing something else, I have time for that while I'm doing dishes or something. And what's really surprised me is how high the quality of the novelizations tends to be, and how just fun and interesting, and it's almost like an extended edition of your favorite stories. And they do tend to give, in some, I know Malcolm Hulke certainly did in some of his novelizations, give a lot more meat and emotional depth to the characters. I think I'm thinking of the Silurians, just adding in backstory and stuff that you wouldn't have time to go into on television because you needed to keep people's attention. And so the annuals, the short stories, the novelizations, it gives you a chance to get to know these characters better and look at them in a different way. And so I think that the 97 annual is going to give people some really interesting looks at the character of the Eighth Doctor, these companions. I want to geek out with you about the Ice Warriors in a second, but I wanted to ask first, do you do you know about the French annual sorry novelizations that have it's for like Doctor Who and the Zarbi, but they have the Fourth Doctor on the cover?
Well, there's all the strange covers with the Japanese ones and that.
Right.
I
And so you
don't
were
know the
talking
French ones,
about
but
just,
that would make
you know,
sense. Yeah.
not knowing which Doctor is which. That must be confusing having the Fourth Doctor on the cover, but the novelization is just Doctor Who and the Zarbis and the Zarbi
Yes,
with, you know.
so you got the Fourth Doctor with Vicky and Ian and Barbara, obviously classic Fourth Doctor companions, going around being sort of a little bit irascible and fiddling with his lapels and having a walking stick. It's going to be a strange read, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Because
Oh
the,
yeah.
the reader will be picturing this guy in a scarf with a walking stick and strange speech patterns and never once offering anybody a jelly baby.
No.
It's a stretch.
So with the Ice Warriors, the costumes, the original costumes had uh fur at the joints, and that was mainly to just disguise the joints. But it has always confused me, because at first it implied to me, if you just, you know, if you watched chronologically and you'd only seen the Ice Warriors from the Ice Warriors, it kind of implied that they either were creatures of fur underneath the armor and it was poking out, or that the fur was there to keep them warm against the cold. And neither of those things, based on other stories, is entirely accurate. So, what's your preferred Ice Warrior design? Do you love that very first one, or do you prefer some of the like the '70s ones without the fur, that were more influenced? You know.
Um, I met the Ice Warriors when I was a kid, and I got chased around the New Forest by Ice Warriors almost as often as I got chased around it by Cybermen. They're a different game, and Yetis are a different game in T.
Mm.
Um, I love them because they were one of the very few times when Doctor really did a green alien monster thing, as opposed to so many other things they did, which weren't. They are that thing. I mean, the script says the face has got to be confused with a Viking helmet, so that sort of makes it a depressingly humanoid looking face. But the mouths are gorgeous. I mean, I once upon a time I had the joy of having a job. I used to repair them and stuff. And yeah, so fur is vital. But for me, then they're not. I think most Doctor Who writers and stuff they have a very narrow idea of what there is. They're they're not lizards as such. They just have things like lizards. I mean, having a carapace doesn't make you a lizard. Um, Quite why we have this bulge here. That's really important. And the fur thing isn't fur as such. That fur is a kind of scales, the same as feathers are. And of course, dinosaurs had those things. And there's lots of other possible explanations for these. Is there actually ever an explanation given for what they're for in fanfic?
Not that I know
Okay,
of.
so I've got one. But, so for me, I mean, they're much more alien, and I prefer the earlier ones because the fur is good because it does disguise those joints. Aesthetically, that's really important. But it also says they're not lizards. Back in the days when dinosaurs weren't furry and didn't have feathers, that was a big signal. Nowadays, you could say, well, they could be because we know better now. But when they were made, that was a big not a lizard sign. Although obviously it was kind of bullshit because it was just saying we're covering up the joints. But that worked very well for me. And the other thing is, it's rather like the few bits of hair you get on the Sontaras for Lynx, the best Sontaran ever, is that Lynx has just a few hairs, and that's horrible somehow. With the Ice Warriors, just that fur says wrong. It's an uncanny valley between lizard and something else, and that's a great signal. The same as I love the way they move their heads, and they that's again I think Sonny Caldes or whoever it was, went to the trouble of not just wearing a suit and lumbering, but giving it a character and doing that tremendous over enunciating with the mouth, which doesn't matter unless you're watching them. And then you realize that mouth really matters because that's the only part that really moves. The eyes aren't doing anything. Um, and so, yeah, that there are, to me, they're a lot more alien. I've got a lot more to say about them, but I would love someone to put that. And they should be at the, if you were to redo the Ice Warriors, which I don't think they have, honest, there's a lot more that could be exaggerated and changed with them. But what they did, of course, was kill the Ice Warriors and turn them into a robot suit. And I cannot see the point of that, really. If you want a robot suit, you've got Daleks. You can do a robot suit with so many things. You could have had a robot suit which pretended to be an Ice Warrior and was another alien. You know, not a problem. You've got yourself another weird alien. But no, they didn't do that. So I really don't. That never happened. Peter Capaldi is brilliant, but that story never happened. Although the scripting was good, the story was stupid, and the Ice Warrior was terrible. So yeah, Ice Warriors, it's not fur. It looks very like fur, and there's lots more going on with those preposterous claws because no creature has claws like that, but they do, and there's all sorts of good reasons. There's good reasons for why, and that's the joy of being a Doctor Who fan or writing stuff, is that you take those problems head on, and you say the monster isn't rubbish; it's our fault. We don't understand how brilliant they are, and that's a lead to a different thing. But there you go. So yeah, massively keen on Ice Warriors, and the voices are the original voices. I don't think they've had such good voices as they used to have in really the first Pat Troughton stories. There's a multi-level quality to them. They don't just hiss. They do more than that. But again, it's that some actor bothered, and that's a delight because it's not like they were being paid extra. They just had to lumber across, not bump into cameras, make their mark, get off. It's a wrap. Okay, we've taped it. It's a thankless task, but so many people did, like particularly the Dalek operators. They almost always turned in so much more than they needed to, so much more perfectionism. Okay, later on they got a bit lazy, but particularly the very first Doctor Who story with Daleks, whatever it was called, there's that thing where they're genuinely conjuring up a terrifying alien entity, not called Daleks. They're just things we haven't learned the names of yet, and they're never more terrifying than when they're really trying to convince you. And again, yeah, so much to respect.
Wow. Lovely, lovely note to end on. There's so much respect. There's these wonderful movers and shakers and contributors who are, giving it their all and really going above and beyond. I do think that is a wonderful way to summarize these annuals. It's just that there have been, there's so many fans who really care about these characters and who have gone above and beyond to write them in a way that they feel is authentic and really lifts them up. So I'm so excited that these annuals are happening and filling in these gaps. And I want to say thank you for joining me here today. I want to be respectful of our time and not go over, although I imagine we could go for another hour just on Ice Warriors alone. But I want to say thank you for joining me today and for being here. Is there anywhere that people can find you on social media to follow your work more?
I've got a website which is about a decade out of date, which is just called, if you just type in SMUZZ, it's got a special word amongst gang culture in America, which is highly entertaining. But apart from that, it's probably going to be my site. If you write that in, which is useful. It used to be called SMS once, which was, I never thought it was a very clever idea. It's just that I ended up being called because I signed myself with initials. And that's a very stupid thing to do. Even before the internet arrives, it's very stupid. But I just did it by accident. In the end, I've ended up being called SMUZZ because it's easier to say than SMS, and it's a hell of a lot easier to find. So there's that. That is a decade out of date. I really have to put stuff on there. As I said, there's a lot of stuff done, published, and so forth. And generally, I do draw and write anyway for a living sometimes. And there's also a Facebook page which is SMUZZ, which is, I don't know, is that probably a year out of date? I've not been doing the social media thing apart from activism. So yeah, they're there. And please, yeah, kick me around a bit to put more stuff on. I really ought to. But there will be more exciting stuff to hopefully put up there fairly soon, I think. So that'll be good. But there's certainly a decade's worth of stuff missing. Still, in the meantime, there's some very old work there which hopefully will entertain people. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks for that opportunity.
Of course, those links will be in the description down below.
You asked me such a simple question. That was such a long answer. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, those links will be in the description down below. Thank you again so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay. Thanks a lot. You've been really easy to talk to. I mean, really great
Thank
interview.
you.
Thanks
That
a lot. And I
means a
love your
lot.
bookshelves.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.